Solomon Fairfax was not the typical field slave that populated Charleston's plantations, standing tall with intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings. He had been educated alongside the children of his previous master, learning to read and write before such education was strictly forbidden. His knowledge of Latin medical terms impressed even Dr. Cornelius Hathaway, the prominent Charleston physician who eventually purchased him. For 32 years before coming to Dr. Hathaway's practice, Solomon had lived on the Pemberton plantation, 15 miles outside Charleston, where he had married a woman named Celia and raised 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, in one of the plantation's slave quarters. The Pembertons had allowed this arrangement because Solomon's healing skills proved invaluable during the frequent outbreaks of fever and disease that could devastate a plantation's workforce overnight. Solomon's expertise had saved countless lives, both slave and free, earning him a measure of respect unusual for someone in his position. He had developed treatments for everything from snake bites to consumption, using a combination of traditional African remedies passed down from his grandmother and new techniques he learned by carefully observing white physicians. This relative comfort ended abruptly in March of 1851, when Edmund Pemberton's gambling debts forced him to sell portions of his human property to cover his mounting financial obligations. The sale was to include Solomon's wife and children, who would be separated and sent to different plantations across the state, a common practice that plantation owners justified as business necessity, but which destroyed families as effectively as any natural disaster. Solomon had pleaded with Edmund Pemberton, offering to work additional years without any compensation if his family could remain together. He had even suggested alternative arrangements, perhaps hiring himself out to other plantations during peak seasons to generate additional income. But Pemberton, facing creditors who demanded immediate payment, refused all negotiations. But the true horror began during the journey to Charleston's slave market. Halfway to the city, one of the wagon wheels struck a deep rut in the rain-soaked road, causing the vehicle to tip precariously. In the confusion that followed, Celia fell from the wagon, striking her head against a sharp rock embedded in the roadside. Blood immediately began flowing from the wound. The slave traders, concerned only with delivering their cargo in sellable condition, made a decision that would haunt Solomon for the rest of his life. Rather than seeking medical attention for Celia, they declared her a loss and ordered the wagon to continue without her. Solomon screamed and fought against his restraints as they left his wife bleeding and unconscious by the roadside. The nightmare intensified at the Charleston slave market, where Solomon was forced to watch as his children were sold to separate buyers. Marcus, age 8, was purchased by a rice planter from Georgetown who specialized in using child labor for the dangerous work of tending irrigation systems in alligator-infested swamps. Samuel, age 6, was bought by a cotton farmer from the upcountry, whose reputation for working slaves to death was well known throughout the region. Grace, age 4, too young for field work, was sold to a family in Savannah as a house servant, disappearing forever into the vast network of human bondage. Through all of this, Solomon maintained an outward appearance of resignation, knowing that any display of emotion or resistance would make his situation even worse. Inside, however, something fundamental had broken. Dr. Hathaway, unaware of the full scope of Solomon's tragedy, purchased him primarily for his medical skills. As Solomon was led away from the slave market to begin his new life, he cast one final look back at the place where his family had been scattered to the winds. In that moment, something cold and calculating settled into his heart, a patience that would allow him to wait, to learn, and eventually to make those responsible pay. That evening, alone in the small room above Dr. Hathaway's practice, Solomon began writing in a leather journal he had managed to keep hidden throughout the ordeal. His first entry began with words that would define the next 4 years of his life. "Today, I watched my wife and children burn, and I did nothing to stop it. But I am still alive, and I remember every face, every name, every voice that laughed as my world ended. They think they have broken me, but they have only taught me patience." The weapon. The months following Solomon's arrival at Dr. Hathaway's practice passed in a blur of routine medical procedures and careful observation. But beneath this facade of acceptance, he was conducting an entirely different kind of study, learning the intimate details of Charleston's medical community and the wealthy families who comprised Dr. Hathaway's clientele. Solomon's most significant discovery came in a treatise on South American plant toxins, which described a compound derived from a vine that grew in the Amazon basin. This particular toxin, when properly prepared, could induce a state of complete muscular paralysis while leaving the victim's consciousness and pain sensation entirely intact. The affected person would appear dead to casual observation, but would remain fully aware of their surroundings for several hours before the toxin's effects proved fatal. Through careful experimentation with laboratory mice, Solomon determined the precise dosage needed to achieve the desired effects. Too little would merely cause temporary weakness. Too much would result in immediate death. But the correct amount would create a state indistinguishable from death to anyone lacking extensive medical knowledge, while preserving the victim's consciousness long enough to experience the terror of being buried alive. Victim 1. Colonel Reginald Fitzpatrick. Solomon's selection of Colonel Reginald Fitzpatrick as his first victim was both strategic and personal. Fitzpatrick had not only attended the auction where Solomon's family was sold, but had loudly joked about the breeding potential of the children being offered for sale. On December 15, 1852, when Fitzpatrick arrived for his regular gout treatment, Solomon added precisely measured drops of his paralytic compound to the colonel's medication. As the toxin began taking effect, Solomon sat beside the colonel's chair and spoke in his same gentle tone. "Colonel Fitzpatrick, I want you to know that my name is Solomon Fairfax, and you destroyed my family at the slave auction on March 14, 1851. You laughed when my children were sold. You joked about their value as breeding stock. Do you remember that day?" Fitzpatrick's eyes showed a flicker of recognition and then growing horror as he realized what was happening. Solomon continued, "You're not dying yet, Colonel. The medicine I gave you has paralyzed every muscle in your body, but your mind is completely clear. You can hear every word I'm saying. You can feel everything that's happening to you. In about an hour, Dr. Hathaway will examine you and pronounce you dead from heart failure. Your body will be prepared for burial, and tomorrow evening you'll be placed in your coffin and buried in St. Michael's Cemetery. But you won't actually die until several hours after you're buried. You'll be completely aware as the dirt is shoveled onto your coffin. You'll hear every sound, feel every sensation, and have plenty of time to think about what you did to my children." The paralysis was now complete. When Dr. Hathaway entered 5 minutes later, he found Solomon standing respectfully beside what appeared to be Colonel Fitzpatrick's body. The doctor's examination confirmed Solomon's diagnosis. The colonel showed no signs of life, and given his known heart condition, the cause of death seemed obvious. Victims 2 through 6. Over the following months, Solomon methodically eliminated 5 more of his targets. Judge Marcus Calverton, who provided legal justification for separating slave families, Captain William Dandridge, a ship owner who transported slaves and supervised their loading like cargo, and 6 prominent slave traders eliminated simultaneously at a business meeting. But Solomon's campaign did not go entirely unnoticed. Thomas Grimby, a journalist for the Charleston Mercury, had begun investigating what he privately called the prominent deaths phenomenon, a series of sudden fatalities among the city's elite that seemed statistically unlikely. On the night of June 15, 1853, Solomon attempted his most ambitious attack,
eliminating 6 men simultaneously by introducing his concentrated toxin into the gaslighting system of their meeting place. The plan succeeded, but Solomon's moment of triumph was short-lived. Thomas Grimby arrived at the building and discovered Solomon standing over 6 apparently dead bodies. The journalist found himself caught between his professional obligation to expose a mass murderer and his human understanding of the injustices that had created that murderer. When Charleston's city constables arrived, Solomon made no attempt to flee or resist arrest. Instead, he offered a complete confession of his actions and a detailed explanation of his methods. The trial. The trial of Solomon Fairfax became one of the most controversial legal proceedings in Charleston's antebellum history, not because of any doubt about his guilt, but because of the moral questions his case raised about slavery, justice, and the limits of human endurance. The 6 men who had been paralyzed in the Henderson and Associates building survived their ordeal and provided the most dramatic testimony of the trial. Colonel Harrison Vance described the psychological torture. "I could hear everything, feel everything, but I could not move so much as an eyelid. When my wife wept over my body, I wanted desperately to comfort her, to let her know I was still alive, but I was trapped inside my own corpse, completely helpless, while arrangements were made for my burial." The revelation that 3 of Solomon's earlier victims, Colonel Fitzpatrick, Judge Calverton, and Captain Dandridge, had been buried while still alive, created a public outcry that extended far beyond Charleston's boundaries. Solomon's final statement. Solomon remained calm and articulate throughout the proceedings, showing no remorse for his actions. His final statement to the court provided a chilling summary. "I was trained to preserve life and ease suffering. But when this society destroyed my family while calling it legal and proper, I learned that the same knowledge used to heal can also be used to ensure justice. I do not ask for mercy because no mercy was shown to my wife and children. I ask only that when you condemn me, you remember that I am not the one who created the system that makes such revenge necessary." The jury's deliberation lasted less than an hour. Solomon Fairfax was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death by hanging. The execution. Beneath the ancient oak trees of St. Michael's Cemetery in Charleston, South Carolina, lie 9 graves that the city's most prominent families refused to discuss. Each headstone bears the name of a wealthy plantation owner who died between 1851 and 1855, all under mysteriously similar circumstances. Sudden paralysis, followed by what physicians of the time called merciful death. But in 1923, when the cemetery underwent renovation, groundskeepers made a horrifying discovery that city officials immediately ordered sealed from public record. Inside each of those 9 coffins, the wooden lids bore deep scratch marks from fingernails, and the bodies lay in positions suggesting desperate struggles. What the authorities found next would haunt Charleston's elite for generations: a leather journal buried beneath the cemetery's oldest magnolia tree, written in the careful handwriting of a man named Solomon Fairfax, detailing 4 years of calculated revenge that began with a family's screams and ended with 9 men buried alive. The discovery of Solomon's journal in 1923, along with the scratch marks inside 9 coffins, provided final confirmation of a story that had passed into legend. Charleston city government immediately classified the discovery as sensitive historical material and sealed all records related to the case. The legacy of Solomon Fairfax's revenge extended far beyond Charleston's boundaries.